Welcome to DevRay, and this is the place for hands-on coding projects where we try to build real-world applications step by step. And for my first project, we'll focus on doing a to-do list. I feel like this is a rite of passage project for many coders, so it's only right that I begin my first video with a to-do list. And let's talk about the deliverables here. So we'll try to keep the deliverables as simple as possible. We broke it down to three. The first one is add to do. So we'll have a text field to input new to do items in the list. The next deliverable is to delete a to do. So have a button to remove the to do item from the list. And the last deliverable is to mark a to do complete. So have a check mark button that strikes through on an uncompleted item. Now let's talk about the deliverables here. We'll try to keep this as simple as possible, and we broke it down to three goals. First one is to add a to-do. So we'll have a text field just to input new to-do items in the list. The next is to delete a to-do item. We'll have a button to remove a to-do item from the list. And finally, we have the ability to mark a to-do item completed. So we'll have a check mark button that strikes through a completed item when clicked. Now let's talk about the agenda. So we'll first start off with creating the HTML. We'll scaffold the HTML skeleton, design and generate to-dos list the skeleton, add JavaScript and CSS files, and add class names and IDs to the HTML elements that we are creating. The next is to create the JavaScript file. And this is going to be the meat of the function. So we'll be creating a function that generates to-do list item HTML. We'll also be adding event listeners to those HTML items. And the final step here will be to generate the CSS file that will be the design. Now let's talk about the agenda. Blah, 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 blah. Alright, so now let's talk about the agenda here. So we'll first start off with creating an HTML file, basically scaffolding the HTML, design and generate to-do list, how it's going to look like. We'll also add the JavaScript and CSS files to connect them together, which we will be dealing with down the line at some point. We will also be adding class names and IDs to these HTML elements that we are generating. The next thing is to create a JavaScript file, which we will define the function that generates to-do list items, and also add event listeners to those new HTML elements. And the final step is to generate the CSS file, which we will be adding the styling to the class names and IDs on those HTML elements. So without further ado, let's get started here. So I'm primarily working off a MacBook Pro, so it should be generally a similar approach even with Windows. So open up a terminal or a shell script file. Alright, so now that we marked our agenda and our goals for this project, let's begin by creating the files. So let me cd into my development directory. From here, I'll be creating the projects and the files, which is right now empty. So let's create the master repo, to-do list, project. Let's cd into that directory. And there's no files in here, but we'll only need 3 main files from here: the HTML, the CSS file, and the JavaScript file. Oh man, I misspelled style. Okay, anyways. Let's delete that. What files do we have? Okay. Style.css. Okay. So now we should have 3 files in here. Yep. Okay. Now let's cd out of there. Now that we have those 3 files in that directory created, let's open this whole thing up with VS Code. Alright, so on the agenda, start off with HTML. Let's create our boilerplate. So the version that I'm using right now for VS Code already has the boilerplate, or the shortcut embedded for generating the template for HTML, which is just exclamation mark. I just press enter and it generates the whole, it generates the whole template for HTML. So what we want to do here, first of all, let's change the title to do list. Start off with that, and while we're here, let's connect let's link our style sheet. Style.css. Sorry, let's link our CSS file to this HTML. We won't do anything yet, or this won't do anything yet, but at least it'll be connected for when we start manipulating that file. And somewhere in the bottom, let's connect our script for JavaScript as well. Source, the name of our file was script.js. Script.js. Okay. So basically, by putting the script at the bottom, the logic for JavaScript will load after or once HTML elements are generated in the body. Alright. So how we ideally want this to look is we should have a main container here. Put this in a div. And we'll call that, or we'll give it a class name of container. Let's keep it simple. Now within that main container, we want to give it a header or a title. We'll call it to-do list. It may not visually make sense right now, but just please bear with me. And then after the title, we want the form. Basically, this form is which will contain the input for adding new to-do list items. We'll give it a class name of input section. And then the form has the input of type text. Might as well give it an ID. So if we're giving it ID, this will be a unique for CSS to reference down later down the line. We'll give it task input. And the placeholder for this input field to make it to make it real clear what this does, which is add a new task. And then similarly, we'll give this a button. So we have two options here. It's either on submit or when they click this button to add this new to-do item. I'll give it an ID of add task. Add. Okay. Now, so basically at the top level we have the header, which is to do ilist right now, and then right below the header is we'll have the input field along with the button. And then the next level here would be the listed items. We'll be using unordered list here. Keep it simple. We'll give it an ID of task list. And basically this is where our to-do items will go, right? So meantime, let's try to map it out. I mean, this logic should be done or generated by JavaScript, but for now we'll give it a template so that it's easy for us to follow. So listed item, give it a class of to-do. And then within each listed item here, we want it to have checkbox for when we toggle when it's finished. And then give it a class name of to-do item. And next to the checkbox, we want the actual text, right? We'll give it a class of to-do text. And we'll put some dummy items here, right? Web dev project using HTML, CSS, and JS. Right. And then finally, we also want to have a button. The delete button here. Class delete button. Yeah, keep it simple. Delete. Basically, yeah, so we have a checkbox that will mark this whole text with a strike through at some point. And then we have a button that will delete this whole listed item. Again, all of this magic will be happening in the JavaScript file. For now, we're just creating a template so that we can follow this, or we can reference this for JavaScript. And I think for now we are finished with HTML. Now let's switch over to JavaScript. Or rather, before we even jump to JavaScript, let's see how this looks like. Alright, so this is what we have for now. Obviously not too pretty, but high level. So we have our header, we have our form, which contains the input where we would be adding our new to-do items. And then when we either press enter or press add, a new listed item would be showing up here. And basically this is our this is our sample listed item. Right now it doesn't do anything, but eventually, once we define it in JavaScript, we'll start making some progress with how this functionality is supposed to be, right? So this is how it looks like for now. So let's go back to our code in VS Code, and let's start with the JavaScript portion. So what I want to do here first is capture that form. To do form equals document dot query selector. Keep this simple. There's only one form, so we'll just tell JavaScript, look for the first form here. First form that shows up within HTML. There's only one, so we can easily grab that. Now within the to-do form, we want to give it an event listener. On submit. And then callback function. And the callback function will immediately be invoked with the event. We'll mark it as E, pretty standard. And the first thing we want to do with that form is prevent default, because I think we briefly saw that. What happens when I click enter, right? By default, when a form is submitted, it just resets the whole thing, and we don't want that to happen for now, not in our use case at least. And then let's pseudocode this. So once a submit is created, or submit event happens, first of all we prevent the refresh, right? And the next thing will be to generate. For now we'll call it, I think that's our target for now. We will invoke a function called add to do, which will generate those HTML and then append it to our existing HTML file, right? Or HTML structure. All right, so let's define that function. And again, so within this function, add to do, our goal is to try and create the exact same elements that we have created as a sample. So we'll be creating an li element as the parentmost element, and the children element within it is the input of type checkbox, span of the actual to do text item, and the button to delete. So at the height of things, we're creating 4 elements within this function, and then appending it to the unordered list. All right, so let's start off. Okay, so before we even generate the elements, we need to know what is in that input, or what it is that the user has inputted, and so that we can add it to the listed item. So we have to find what is typed in this input field. So in JavaScript, let's try to get that using document.get element by ID. We only give it one, which is task input. So JavaScript will look for any elements that has an ID of task input. And again, IDs are unique, so this makes it easier for JavaScript to find out that there's only one input field with ID of task input in our HTML. And then once JavaScript identifies that, we want to get that value within that text field, and let's store that in task text, and then we'll call it task input dot value dot trim. That's hold on. Task. I don't know why that was bugging out a bit. Okay. We'll try to face that when we come to it if there's an issue. So basically, we found our element, which is task input. We want to get the value within, or the value input in that field. We will also trim it, remove any spaces associated. And then before we add any fields to it, we have to make sure that task text is not empty, right? So we're checking the values of it. For now, we're just checking if it's empty. If it is empty, there's no point in generating elements. There's nothing there. So for now, we'll just stop the function here and return. But if it's not empty, let's start creating some elements. Let task item equals document dot create element. We'll create li. Again, that's our parent most container here. So we want to create that first. And following the same layout we have is we want to give it a class name. Task item dot class name. To do. And fair advice here is other people might just be using HTML. So there's multiple ways of JavaScript rendering HTML elements. One is what I'm doing right now is just manually creating these using creating the elements using document. The other one is the other approach might just be people writing the HTML elements by hand and then just appending it. Both approach works, but this approach makes it easier for me to identify these elements and attach event listeners without having to look for them in HTML. So I mean, we'll finish rewriting this whole function so that I can explain later like why I'm going with this approach. There's really no right approach. It depends on what the preference here is and what your use case is. Again, we're trying to keep this simple so it's easier for us to identify HTML elements and adding event listeners to them. All right, so let's continue. We added the class name to li. The next one is to create the checkbox. Let checkbox equals document dot create element. Now we're creating input. Checkbox, we'll give it a type of checkbox. Checkbox will also give a class name of to do item. Hopefully that's it for checkbox. Okay, checkbox is finished. Next one is to create span. Now I'll keep these generic so it's easy to just read them. Let span, sorry, not the element. Let's not, what's a good name for this? The other one is checkbox. We'll call this to do text command.create element. This is a span to do text dot it is to do text class name. And then to do text should also have the content of whatever is typed in the new, basically this is going to be the input, what's inputted by the user, right? And then we're adding it as the content here. So this should match what was found in task text. We are setting the the text content to the task text that we have here. Now, what's the issue here? Oh, okay. I guess we lost that at some point. Okay. Alright, so now we've created the span. And the last item here is to create the delete button. Create element, button, dot, well, there's the text content of delete. This has a class name of delete button. And then, as mentioned, okay, so now we've created our elements. And then, as I briefly mentioned earlier, so with this approach where we're creating the documents by hand and then storing them to a variable, I can easily access them and add event listeners directly to them. We can also identify the variables much easier here. So, okay, as an example, let's start with delete button. So basically, our plan here is when delete button is clicked, we will remove the parent container, which in this case will be task item. Basically, we want to delete this. Once we delete this, the parent container, all of its children elements are also deleted. So that makes it easier for us to just remove items, right? We don't have to worry about doing a delete for each of these items. So let's implement that. To do, or what is it? Delete button dot, we'll add an event listener to it. So when it is clicked, we'll define the function, or the callback function as, so again, what was the main element, or parent element here is task item. So task item dot remove, right? So what will happen here is task item, once we call remove on it, this element will get deleted as well as its child elements. So it makes the cleanup much easier for us. So delete button is clicked. Okay. Any other event listeners that we want to create here? Well, let's see how this looks like for now. I'm doing a lot of guessing here. Let's see if this works. So we have this function defined now, add to do. Okay, let's go back to our web app. So we have our template here for now. So this, even though we added the JavaScript file, this was not generated by JavaScript file. This was pre-populated. So this has none of the actions that we define in JavaScript. For us to test the new one, we have to manually, or we have to actually create a new to-do list, and then that will contain all the logic that was generated by JavaScript. So let's see if this works. Okay, so let me refresh just to confirm before I assume that we have any errors here. Okay, looks like there's an issue. Let's see how to go about this. Is there an issue? Okay. Let's try that again then. Okay. So we tested it, or we're running it, nothing's actually happening. But this is happening, or at least this function is being invoked. Now, what we forgot to do here, or not we, I forgot, is to actually append these things, right? Like we created the elements, but nothing's happening to them. They just exist in limbo, function ends, and then they disappear. This actually has to be added to the HTML file. So, what's the, okay, so the parent element that we're generating here is li, and we want to add this to the unordered list existing HTML element, right? So next step here is to identify that list, document.get element by ID, and the ID for that one is task list. Okay, and now that we identified that unordered list, we want to append all of that to task item. And even before that, actually. So our goal is to append the parent element task item, but we also have to append these children items. So before that, task item dot append. So we're gonna append checkbox, to do text, and delete button in that order. And then once we appended these three to the parent element task item, then we can append to the main item. So it's a series of appending here. And then while we're at it, might as well reset this field. So task dot value equals empty. So basically we're just resetting that text field that we are inputting. Okay, let's try that again. Refresh, test, boom. I guess we didn't add any logic for this checkbox yet, but the delete we did. So if we click delete, what happens? The parent listed item is now gone, along with its children items, which is what we want to happen here. Again, this won't happen for the existing one because this was not generated by us. It came with the HTML element, which had no actions with it. Okay, so delete works. The next thing we want to probably tackle here is that checkbox. So in the checkbox, we want to add an event listener on click, right? There's the only thing we can do there. And then let's define the callback function. So what do we want to happen here? So let's go back here. So if I click this, basically we want to generate a strike through within our text content for that listed item. And then similarly, if I uncheck it, we want to leave it back the way it was. The existing no strike through, right? It's just a text content. So let's define that in our JavaScript. So if checkbox dot, okay, perfect, checked. So if it's checked, okay, so we'll keep this simple for now. Basically, what we want to happen here is we want to get a strike through, and let's leave that logic in CSS. So for now, what we want to happen is to do text get a class name or class list added to it that says completed. Okay, we'll leave this for CSS to manage later. But so basically, if the checkbox is clicked, we're going to give the to-do text additional class name here, which is completed. And basically, spoiler alert, in the CSS we'll define it as if an element has a class name of completed, we'll give it a strike through styling, right? Similarly, or opposite, we will remove that completed the completed class name from the element, and then it'll have a default styling of just a regular text. There's no strike through. So if we were to do this right now, you won't notice any difference. Or maybe we will see it actually. Let's see it in the element. So if we use, okay, let's make sure this was done correctly. Huh, okay, it's not happening yet. Let's see. Text. Yep. I mean, there's way better ways to debug this, but we'll keep this for the sake of simplicity. How to debug this. So if I click this, huh, it's not happening. Do I need to load the file again? Let's see. Alright, let's inspect. Oh, duh. Okay. So, again, this will not have, this existing HTML element will not have our logic, only the new ones that we add. So in this case, so if we were to inspect this new element that we generated, should now have, yep. So in that text field, specifically just the test text field, we have the old to-do text class name, and then we added completed class name. And then similarly, if we remove it, that class name gets removed from that. So again, we'll leave CSS to manage that styling of strike through, but all JavaScript is doing is just adding that class name that CSS can work with down the line. So for now, we are done with the JavaScript language, or I mean JavaScript logic. And as for the final agenda, let's apply some styling to this. And by no means I am not a CSS expert. I'll try to keep this real simple. And it might be easier to do a side-by-side comparison here. So yeah, let's do a side-by-side so we can see real time what our styling is doing. So let's start off with the body here. Let's add some styling to the body. These some generic ones that I remember working with. Arial, sans serif should have one. I don't know why that Helvetica is showing. Okay, we'll leave it. Okay, slight difference. That looks slightly better. Give it display flex. Yep. So our goal right now is trying to center these elements, these existing elements, and justify. Display flex just makes that so much easier for us. Center, justify content center, align items center. Let's see how that looks like first. Okay, getting a little better. The height. We want to make this 100. Right. Okay. This just makes it a little dynamic. Background color, something really generic. F4, F4, F4. Okay, there we go. And then, okay. This might also be helpful to have the HTML elements side by side. Okay, let's move this here. Okay. Alright, so the body's done. The next thing we want to take care of is container. So in CSS, if you're trying to reference a class name, we use the dot in the CSS file. So what do we want the container to have? Background. Yeah, keep it simple, white. Yep. Okay. Padding, so elements around it. And give it 20 pixel. There you go. So it just expands the container with padding. Give it a border radius, so the border is not very sharp. Barely visible. Maybe. Let's see, 50. Okay, too circular. All right, we'll give it 10 pixels here. There we go. Box shadow. How do we do this? 0, 0. And then RGBA. 0. I'm just pulling numbers out, but let's see how this works. Okay. Little shadowy. Let's give it a min width of 500 pixels. See how that looks like. Okay. You know what? Do we need... maybe... Okay, let's leave it alone for now. Just see how that looks like later. But let me put this down, so just in case we need to go back to it. Alright, so container. The input field. Let's make that look slightly cooler. So width 80%. Okay, cool. Padding. We need padding for this. Let's see. Yeah, we'll leave it like this for now. No need for padding. Now the buttons, so we'll have 2 of them, right? Okay. Yeah, we'll leave it alone for now too. No buttons. Okay. So this is what I mentioned earlier, is... Oh man, that listed item is bothering me. Okay, let's come back to the completed later. For now, input section, the form. Maybe we could split that a bit. So input section. Let's use the good old display flex. How's that look? Okay. Let's get some spacing around it. Justify content. Space between. Okay, cool. Alright, now let's focus on the actual to-do here. Okay, so to-do class. Again, display flex. Justify content. Space between. Alright, let's see how that looks. Disgusting. Okay. No worries. Let's keep going. Now, as for the unordered list, we want to remove some of this additional spacing that's providing, right? I think it's already gone, but it doesn't hurt. Okay. Next one is clean cycle here. Alright, let's try shooting for that checkbox. To do item. It's really huge, this thing. Let's give it a max width of 20 pixels. Okay, there we go. That's taking up a huge amount of space. Delete button. Yeah, we'll just make it red, or some form of red. Background color, RGB. Just use that. Ugh, it's not that better. Okay. So at least VS Code has this cool extension where you can just choose the kind of red that you like. Let's try to go with this. It's not even red. Okay, I'm gonna go higher. I think that's how it looked like earlier. Alright, whatever. We'll leave it the way it is. Okay. No, I'm still not a fan of that. It's like all clunkered up. Yeah. Okay. I feel like if I expand it a bit, yeah, it looks better. Giving it a minimum width. Okay, so we'll leave it with a minimum width. I forgot what this one did actually. Let me see. Okay, that looks a little better. Alright, you know what? Let's leave it like this. So we'll leave that padding that we added for the inputs. Okay. Now, as mentioned earlier, is we would leave CSS to manage that crossout. So whenever we click this, it'll manage this line straight through. So let's add that right now, actually. So it was a completed class name, text decoration of line through, and be a color of gray. Okay. So let's try to test this out. And there we go. So when we click it, there's a variation that it gets us line through with the color of gray, and then when we unclick it, it just goes back to the way it was. And of course, let's test out delete, which will delete the whole listed item. Boom. And again, none of this will work here because, you know what? Let's just remove that whole thing, right? We'll get confused here. So remove that content. Let's generate a new to-do list. Finally, to-do. Okay, and then we strike, or we do a line through. That's finished. Or yeah, we click checkbox to mark that it's completed, and then we uncheck it if we need to do it again. And then if we're never going to do it again, we just delete it. Oh, okay, this should have cleared. Let's see what was wrong with the logic. Task text value. Oh, wait, okay. Should have been this. I was looking at the text itself, where I should have been looking at this element. Okay, there we go. And there it is, our first to-do list item, or to-do list project. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on the CSS here. I'm no expert by any means. I know the very basic knowledge about it, but I just wanted to cover some of the core concept of to-do list project, or which focus on which focuses on three key elements here, which is generating the HTML, uh, basically the skeleton, JavaScript, which is the whole logic, and the CSS, which is the styling. Um, yeah, so thank you for watching. I appreciate any viewership, any feedback. Please leave them in the comments. I'll try to generate more of these projects that focus on workflows, real life applications. But I feel like it was just right that I start my first project in this channel with a to-do list. I think that's how I first learned, and it's only right that I create my first video with a to-do list. Okay, everyone. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. See you next time. Bye-bye.